thinking that it was extinguished already, but in fact a spark lit up the entire forest. And several days later, well, within that first day, 42 lives were lost. 2 lives would be lost from their injuries later, making a total of 44 people being killed, all due to this severe teenage accident from a young Druze boy in a Druze village in the Carmel. And nobody was prepared for the devastation or the disaster that would take place, forcing Israel to call upon its neighbors to come to its rescue, to help. And I tell you, thank God the big US Galaxy transport planes came transporting water, and the Russian, I think they have the biggest planes of all just about, came as well. And of course the fires were already raging for some time by the time they arrived. Even Bulgarian firefighters showed up. And even Turkey sent some firefighters, and Greece. So it was an amazing thing that was going on. And it's good when nations can come to the rescue of each other. Israel has also been first responders in earthquakes throughout the Middle East, and in places like Turkey or wherever Israel's had the door open to, you'll find Israeli emergency rescue teams on the scene very quickly. I want to tell you that we as an organization, Vision for Israel and the Joseph Storehouse, have also been first responders, and we've been sending out financial vouchers up to families who have lost everything. That's just one part of what we're doing right now. We're going to also plant a forest up there on behalf of believers. We're also sending goods and services up there and preparing medical goods up there. About 219 families lost their homes. And so it's very devastating. As one of the homeowners told my wife, who we've gotten to know quite well, he said, "We were families who gave to charity. Now it's a very humbling thing that we're now the recipients ourselves of charity." And so it all came about unexpectedly. And I believe that's the kind of storms that we're facing in the future. The Israeli headlines during the midst of the fires on Mount Carmel said, "Hell on earth." That was the Israeli headline in Hebrew, "Hell on earth." And it looked that way. And never before have I, as a Jewish believer living in Israel, realized or fathomed the depth of the spiritual warfare that would be going on and that we're facing now in the coming days. I can't express it clear enough, but I'm trying. And so I want to emphasize that. So here is the situation. Let's turn to 2 Chronicles if we can, chapter 20. Second Chronicles 20. Many of you know from the conference I shared as you're going to that verse, but for others that may have missed it, in our conference in Charlotte, I shared how one of the powers that we're facing in Israel today is the spirit of Hamas, power of Hamas. I don't just see them as a political entity, I see them also as a spiritual power. For in Genesis chapter 6, verse 11, it says, "The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence." And you've heard me share before that the word for violence in Hebrew, in Genesis and many other places through Scripture, is the word Hamas. And you can check with any Hebrew language version. I didn't bring my Hebrew Bible tonight, but I guarantee you it's there in Hebrew as well as many other places. And I'll talk a little bit more about Hamas a little bit later on. But it says in Genesis 6 verse 12, "So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, For the earth is filled with violence, or again the word Hamas, through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. I believe that the nations that play this game of diplomacy and not just compromise, but actually open the doors for Hamas, are not just opening the doors of negotiations with the terror group, they're actually opening up themselves to an actual power at work in the earth, a power of violence and terror. And it shocks me, and being an American citizen as well as an Israeli citizen, how the U.S. is so easily deceived into this as well. Many of the average folks in this country don't know how much the United States State Department and the FBI and the CIA have opened their doors up to terrorists and their groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah and others right in the halls of Washington, D.C. itself. You talk to some of the Christian FBI men. One such guy is a guy that I actually discipled, who's now one of the branch directors of the FBI in the Midwest. He says it's incredible how much this country has stooped over backwards to open its gates up to Islamic extremists, even in Washington, D.C. itself, in the course of this attitude of appeasement, which is only going to backfire against the United States in the end. Right. But this is a reality, and I would dare say that American policy, not only under the present administration, but having started long ago, has actually created a Frankenstein by using U.S. taxpayers' funds to build up the Palestinian Authority Army, which is only going to be used against Israel in the end of all things. And today, this last week, Hillary Clinton, the State Department representative now, is in fact increasing the U.S. expression of support to the Islamic Arab nations of the Middle East in a bid to thwart Israel's attempts to settle Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem, which no other previous administration has really opposed until we arrived at the present administration. It is directly putting the United States and its citizens in a coming conflict with Israel as a nation, on a head-on collision. And I know that's not in your hearts here, and it's not in the hearts of a lot of America, at least about 60% of America, but for some reason, that protest voice is not being heard loud enough and clear enough in Washington, D.C. This may be the last opportunity we can share that. You know,